All right, picture the deadly frontier of the ancient world. It's 101 AD, and we're standing on the banks of the mighty Danube River. On one side, the known, civilized Roman Empire. On the other, the untamed wild. And right there on the edge is Emperor Trajan, commanding the largest war machine in Roman history. We are talking about 100,000 elite troops. Their one brutal objective is to cross that river and completely wipe out the Kingdom of Dacia. Now, just looking at the sheer math of warfare, this should have been an absolute walkover, right? But waiting on the other side is King Decebalus. And, well, let's just say he isn't exactly playing by conventional rules.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this is the central mystery of our explainer today. Facing down a literal global superpower, how on earth did a tiny mountain kingdom turn its punishing terrain into a colossal meat grinder, one that almost buried Rome's invincible military machine right there beneath the snow? To wrap our heads around the staggering scale of this conflict, we can't just look at the battle lines, we actually have to look backward. Because you see, this whole war was fueled by a deeply buried national humiliation. If we rewind about 15 years to the mid-80s AD, Dacian warriors did the unthinkable in a series of brutal mountain ambushes. They didn't just fend off a Roman incursion, they literally wiped entire legions off the map. And even worse, they captured a legion's sacred standard, the eagle. To Rome, losing an eagle is a deep, agonizing wound to the very soul of the empire. Desperate to just stop the bleeding, the previous emperor, Domitian, actually agreed to pay Decebalus an annual tribute. Think about that. Rome was literally renting peace. But Rome does not forget. Now Trajan is in power, and he's absolutely determined to settle that score, with interest. Notice the stark contrast between these two leaders. Trajan is a soldier first and foremost, a guy who intimately understands the nuts and bolts of logistics and supply lines. For him, writing that annual tribute check to Dacia is an open, bleeding insult. Plus, Dacia is sitting on massive gold mines in the Carpathian foothills, and Trajan desperately needs that wealth to refill the imperial coffers. On the flip side, King Decebalus is smart. He knows exactly which way the political winds are blowing. The gold that bought off Domitian, yeah, that won't work on Trajan. War is coming for sure. So Decebalus prepares to wage a purely asymmetric defense. His goal is simple: make a Roman victory so unthinkably expensive that it's just not worth it. Let's see how this builds into one of the most ruthless defensive strategies in history. Decebalus makes a brutal, grim calculation. He orders his own villages burned to the ground before Roman forces can even reach them. He literally poisons his own kingdom's wells to deny the advancing army a single drop of water. Entire communities pack up and abandon their ancestral farmland, retreating way up into the mountains. This is a scorched earth strategy of pure attrition. The goal here isn't to hold ground, it's to make the campaign so logistically punishing that Rome just throws its hands up and goes home. But Decebalus is up against something terrifying, because when Rome goes to war, it doesn't just send guys with swords, it sends a mobile civilization. As Dacia tries to use the harsh mountain terrain as a weapon, Trajan's army simply deletes the terrain. Roman surveyors, carpenters, and engineers are marching right alongside the legions. They're clearing whole forests in a matter of days. They're paving roads right behind the advancing line so supply wagons can just roll on up uninterrupted. This isn't an army cautiously tiptoeing through the landscape. It's a force that methodically reshapes the earth to suit itself. And nowhere is this more terrifyingly obvious than at the Danube. For centuries, this massive, freezing, fast-moving river was Dacia's absolute best line of defense. But Roman engineers neutralize what took nature millennia to carve in, a few days? They lash hundreds of boats together, throw wooden planks across them, and boom, a massive, continuous pontoon bridge. Imagine being a Dacian scout up on a hill, watching tens of thousands of Roman legionaries just marching across the river in tight, perfect formation. It's a devastating psychological blow. Geography itself has basically been canceled.
Section 1. The Bloody Stalemate at Tapae.
By the summer of 101 AD, Trajan's unhurried, heavily supplied advance slams head-on into Decebalus's forces at a narrow, stormy mountain pass called the Iron Gates, or Tapae. This is literally the front door to the Dacian heartland, and both sides know exactly what's on the line here. And this is where we see the sheer, terrifying genius of Dacian warfare. In this tight pass, Decebalus unleashes the Falx. Picture a massive, curved blade swung with both hands, almost as tall as a man. It's engineered specifically to arc right over the top edge of a Roman shield and strike the exposed shoulder, neck, or skull of the poor soldier hiding behind it. It's really less of a sword and more of a precision instrument designed to completely dismantle Rome's single greatest tactical advantage.
The clash of these two tactics is an absolute bloodbath. Rome's famous interlock shield walls, the formations that had literally conquered 3 continents, turn out to be disturbingly vulnerable to the downward strike of the Falx. The ground in the pass turns slick and red. Now, Rome does eventually win the field and forces the Dacians to fall back, but the casualties are just staggering. In fact, things get so desperate that medical supplies completely run out. Emperor Trajan is actually recorded personally tearing strips of cloth from his own clothes just to bandage his bleeding soldiers. Dacia had bitten back, and they bit back hard.
Section 2. The Winter Gamble. Just as Trajan is gearing up to push deeper, winter hits, choking the mountain passes with snow. Temperatures absolutely plummet, and those pristine supply lines freeze up. What was supposed to be a quick summer campaign grinds to a miserable, frozen stalemate. So, the crucial point is how Decebalus chooses to use this pause. He doesn't just sit back and regroup. Actually, he orchestrates an insanely risky counterattack. He teams up with the Roxolani, this fierce nomadic people famous for their heavy, armored cavalry. Together, they pull off an unbelievable maneuver. They cross the frozen, solid ice of the Danube River on foot to strike straight into undefended Roman territory. This is a stroke of strategic brilliance. They aren't going after the main Roman army. That would be suicide. Instead, they target Moesia, a Roman province in the rear where the garrisons were totally thinned out to support the main invasion. Decebalus's objectives are surgical: burn the supply depots, disrupt the grain shipments, and completely sever the massive logistical lifeline keeping Trajan's 100,000 men fed. He's trying to starve the Roman war machine to death before spring even thaws the mountain passes.
Suddenly, the entire outcome of the war is hanging by a thread. Reports bordering on absolute panic flood into Trajan's winter headquarters. Moesia is burning. This king they thought they had cornered in the mountains is now rampaging through their supply lines. It's a moment of very genuine crisis for the Roman high command. By all conventional rules of ancient warfare, an offensive of this scale just shouldn't be happening in the dead of winter.
But Trajan, he does not panic. He knows that marching his guys overland through deep snow would take weeks he simply doesn't have. So he makes a highly unorthodox call. He mobilizes the entire Roman river fleet operating on the Danube. Right in the middle of winter, he loads his most battle-hardened legions directly onto these boats and sends them hauling downstream. It's an absolute masterclass in using existing infrastructure to move at speeds a land-bound army could never even dream of matching.
Section 3. Innovation at Adamclisi.
This rapid river deployment lets Trajan intercept the invaders at a place called Adamclisi. The Dacian and Roxolani strike force were probably expecting weeks of breathing room, but instead, surprise, they find Trajan's legions already waiting for them. But what happens here isn't decided by, glorious, heroic charges. It's decided by a series of small, almost invisible micro-advantages stacking up on top of each other. Trajan's rapid river transport meant his troops were in perfect position. His infantry formed tight, unbroken defensive lines, their spears leveled in unison, mechanically absorbing those heavy cavalry charges. And crucially, Rome had learned from the nightmare at Tapae.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real power of the Roman war machine. To counter that devastating Dacian Falx, Roman engineers made a small, seemingly unglamorous adjustment. They literally welded reinforced steel crossbars directly across the top of the legionaries' helmets. That simple, mundane battlefield adaptation was the difference between a fatal strike to the skull and a totally survivable glancing blow. Think about it. Dacia's absolute deadliest weapon was neutralized by a clinical mechanical tweak.
Section 4. Infrastructure defeats improvisation.
That Adamclisi, sheer desperation, is finally ground to dust by engineering and discipline. The exhausted Dacian and Roxolani forces, who had risked literally everything on that winter river crossing, begin to break apart. Their cavalry charges just splinter against those unyielding Roman spear walls. Decebalus's boldest, riskiest gamble ends in total defeat. By 102 AD, the war is effectively over. The same king who once forced Rome to pay him tribute is finally forced to his knees. And the surrender terms? They're deeply humiliating by design. Dacian fortresses are systematically dismantled, stone by stone. Massive stockpiles of weapons, including those dreaded Falx blades, are handed over. Roman garrisons are installed right inside the territory, essentially turning a proudly independent kingdom into a heavily monitored client state.
But here is the darker reality of this explainer. That treaty of 102 AD, yeah, it wasn't truly peace. It was a trap made of time. Decebalus was stripped of his fortresses and his weapons, sure, but he wasn't stripped of his pride. For 3 long years, he quietly rebuilt. He recruited fresh fighters, repaired whatever he could hide, and waited patiently for Rome's attention to drift across its sprawling borders. He was prepping for one final catastrophic war. When that inevitable second war finally flared up, Trajan realized he couldn't rely on temporary measures anymore. So what does he do? He commissions the construction of the single greatest stone bridge the ancient world had ever seen, right across the Danube. A permanent, monumental crossing engineered specifically to guarantee that Rome would never, ever have to fight a difficult campaign across that river again.
Which brings us to a really profound realization about this whole conflict. Decebalus had brilliant tactics, and his fighters were just incredibly courageous, totally mastering guerrilla warfare and asymmetric defense. But this war essentially tested one brutal question. Can raw courage ever truly outlast superior engineering and logistics?
The answer, unfortunately for Dacia, is no. Rome didn't just outfight them, they outbuilt them. Following that second war, Dacia was absorbed so completely into the Roman Empire that it would literally take centuries for its memory to even resurface. It's a stark, almost scary reminder of the terrifying efficiency of industrialized warfare, where a kingdom fighting desperately for its very survival is ultimately erased by an empire that simply solves every obstacle with a hammer, a paved road, and enough time. It leaves us with a chilling final thought. In the relentless, mechanical march of empire, how many other brilliant, defiant kingdoms lie forgotten beneath the very roads we walk today?